So let's think about what a population is. When we say population, you probably have an idea of what that means. When scientists, conservation biologists talk about populations, generally we all know, we feel like we're talking about the same thing. Fact is actually that a population, while it does have a distinct definition, it is very often not a distinct thing in nature. One definition is a population is a subset of individuals of one species that occupies a particular geographic area and interbreeds. So let's think about that for a moment. So it's one species, but it's a subset of the one species. It occupies a particular area, geographic area, but that itself could be not distinct, and it interbreeds. So these are individuals within that thing we're calling a population can move back and forth, and at least potentially breed with each other. So you think about birds here in a colony, or flowers out here in a meadow. Sometimes populations are so sharply defined by their boundaries, if you map them out, that there's really nobody, that there's not any kind of that it's just obvious what the population is, that they actually are distinct, and that's not arbitrary. For example, the American burying beetle. American burying beetle is an endangered species. There are other species in the same genus which do the same thing. They're not endangered. They're a fascinating species. The whole genus is burying beetles. There's at least two common species here in Rhode Island, but the uncommon rare one is the American burying beetle. And it was near extinction, probably still is near extinction, really. And it's only found, if you were to map out their distribution, you'd only find them in a few places. And you could just draw a little line around where they are, and those are very distinct populations. In other words, they're separate from each other, and you can see that on the map. This is the former range, by the way, and this is down to where they are now. By the way, this is a example here of a species which is highly endangered, and who the focus of conservation efforts is on a population, captive populations, and the population that was translocated to the wild. This is out in Nantucket. They've also been reintroduced to Block Island. So this is an example of captive breeding in the zoo, Roger Williams Zoo, and translocation. The reason why it's such a difficult problem to conserve the American burying beetle, because this is what you have to do. You have to basically, to get them to breed, there's the adult right there. You have to give them a meal, which is going to be something like a piece of chicken that's going to rot. And then they actually put a male and female on there, and then they'll mate. They'll lay their eggs on that rotting piece of flesh. They'll do their thing. And then they will raise their eggs, and hopefully a new population they'll contribute to a new population. But they can't do all this on their own. So if they were just to release those adults out there on Nantucket, they would fly around and probably not find each other, not find any carcasses. I think one group is studying the American burying beetle, so we'll hear more about this. There's the habitat they're in. So Nantucket, of course, is a distinct geographic feature. So you could say that population, American burying beetle there, is a distinct population. You can just tell by looking. Here's another example. Sometimes populations occupy islands. It may be, for example, the Galapagos tortoises. These are separate, actually subpopulations of the same. I think they're all the same species, but they cannot cross between the islands. So the Galapagos tortoises, which are on each island, they are distinctly, they're isolated in those islands, and those are populations. We can call them populations, and you can just draw a line around the edge of the island, and that's the population. I'm just giving examples here of distinct populations where they're geographically distinct. And then we'll look at the more common case where they're not geographically distinct. So if you study, one of the populations of Galapagos tortoises, you're talking about one of the islands. But most populations are not like that. So for example, let's just take a look here. It's a really common species around here, which is wood frogs. So here's with North Woods, north of campus there. It's a deciduous forest. And starting during the spring, during the late February in some years, and usually in early March to mid-March, there's ponds, little ponds in here which fill during at the end of winter and stay wet through spring, and then they dry up in the summer. They're called ephemeral ponds. And there's like one right over here. There's probably at least 12 of them in here, down here, and then there's permanent ponds down here. But in these ephemeral ponds, wood frogs will breed in some of them, and when they breed, they are pretty easy to find because they call. So this is kind of the sound of spring, early spring in Rhode Island. I'll call them chuckles. I hear wood frogs. You know, when you hear wood frogs, you know winter's back in focus. We're headed into spring. Now, so we say the wood. So what if we were to refer to the wood frog population in Rhode Island, Washington County, North Woods? We'll just say North Woods. The North Woods population of wood frogs. If you look at North Woods, this is a very typical of the eastern United States and southern New England. You have forest, deciduous forest, separated, bisected by roads. But really, it's all continuous. So if you're a wood frog, it's no problem to hop across Plains Road. Maybe a problem to get across the railroad tracks. But these roads are no obstacle at all to frogs. And they're all over Rhode Island. They're all over New England. They're all over the eastern United States. I don't know how far south they go. They're kind of a more northerly species. But so you can talk about the North Woods population of wood frogs, but really they're not defined within, they're not isolated in here at all. They can, wood frogs from outside the population can come in, and so you might say, well, what's a population? It turns out it actually doesn't really matter in the end. As long as you define what you're calling the population and you describe what it is the bounds of the so-called population, as long as you define it distinctly and another investigator could repeat your study, and then people in the future could redo surveys in the same area, the same place, then that's fine, even though the population is an arbitrary thing. This is an example of one of those ephemeral ponds here. So a pond like this right here will be totally dry during the summer and fall. So this is so that's just in general the question of what populations are. This is a point where we would have had a discussion here, but oftentimes conservation biology, when you actually go out in the field or you work in a zoo with a captive population or whatever it is, you're usually dealing with a population, not biodiversity or a whole species. It's rare when a whole species is in one place. So really, what I'm getting at is that conservation biology, when it comes down to actually doing things, very often times comes down to populations. And so a lot of conservation biology is ecology and population biology, population genetics. A lot of the science, a lot of the data, a lot of the learning you'll do comes, it's the level of populations. So what do we need to know about populations? This is where you can just think about this. What do we need to know about populations? You're probably thinking, well, size, how large they are. So a lot of conservation work is focused on just estimating population size. You'll see that's very hard to do. and you cannot know exactly what the population size really is. But you can know if it's for sure whether it's increasing or decreasing. So sometimes you're not really concerned with the size of the population as you are, is it decreasing, is it increasing, or is it stable? What else about a population? I would want to know something about its genetics, the genetic diversity in populations. I mean, how much inbreeding there is there, how much homozygosity versus heterozygosity there is in the population. Other things about populations, think about individuals, how much do they move around? So dispersal, how far can individuals move? Breeding individuals move. What kind of habitat do they need? So much of conservation biology is focused on habitats. For example, here in Rhode Island, there's a lot of research with American woodcock and New England cottontails and species like that. And so the research has been done where they go in and study at a very detailed level what those animals are selecting in their habitat, where they choose to mate and have their young, and what kind of habitats do they reject. We can't really know what's inside the mind of an animal, a wild animal. However, you can look at where they go and where they don't go, and you can even do some experiments to find out what kind of habitat they need. And then eventually you want to know, oftentimes, are they, for example, are they in danger of extinction? What's the probability of persisting into the future? So habitat associations and questions about where are they are and where they're not, that is kind of in the realm of natural history and descriptive work. So a lot of times just the information on populations, what we need is just basic information on the species, and oftentimes that's lacking. So for example, there are rare species of rare orchids in Africa and in Madagascar, many of them, and you'll see critically endangered, and we're obviously trying to keep them from transitioning to extinction in the wild and then extinct. Oftentimes, for example, just to get a species listed here in the IUCN Red List, to be able to assess it, to determine where it is along this gradient here, requires data that doesn't exist. Somebody has to go out and do the hard work, usually in the field, to estimate population size and learn about its habitat associations and its breeding requirements, all of that, diet, food, soils, whatever it is. Somebody's got to go out and do that work, and a lot of times the work has not been done. Someone has to go and you read about this. This is just one particular species here, and here's a description of its habitat, and it's thought to be declining. And well, why is it thought to be that? Because someone went in there and studied it. But there are many species for which we don't know how endangered it is. We might think it's rare, but we don't have enough information to be able to conclude that. There's not enough information to assess it here. So a lot of research is just some basic natural history. Go in and trap and sample and survey and just record what you find. You're not doing science and you're looking at the effect of X on Y. Not doing experiments, you're just figuring things out. As far as estimating size and changes in size over time, this is more the field of population biology. So theories, so NRS 305, if you take that class, we get into that. So the methodologies really come from the field of population biology and ecology there. And so this is more, I guess you can think of this more as more like what most people think of as science. You're using scientific methods. You're not doing experiments. Genetic diversity, this would be the realm of population biology, but population genetics, that part of population biology. Probability of persistence, that's modeling. And we will in this class, we're going to use all of these. We're going to see examples of all this kind of information. You just see where how far I want to go in this video here. Let's see here. Yeah, so I want to end it here and start another video. But in the next video, we're going to look at the how to what we need to do and know in order to estimate population size. So this will just be a brief overview in this class. If you take NRS 305, we'll get into this in more depth. But for conservation biology, NRS 223, we're just going to broadly look at this question. You'll come away with a basic understanding of the challenges of estimating population size, and that'll be in the next video.